So that's a long, narrow trough of clay. I've also heard that they used a network of ditches over the whole site, and once put the water in those, and then they could tell exactly where they're at, exactly how much land they need to take here or there. It is not known for sure how the Egyptians found the true north so accurately. The star nearest the north celestial pole in Khufu's time was Alpha Draconis, and this may not have been close enough to be very helpful. While it is possible to mark, you know that the stars, as the Earth, well, everything moves, the galaxy is moving, so the stars over time move. When it is possible to mark the directions of the sun's rising and setting and bisect the angle between these directions, the sun is too large an object to sight on accurately. A likelier method is to build an artificial horizon, that is, a circular wall high enough so that a person seated in the center cannot see any earthly objects over the top of the wall. The seated observer, with his head at the center of the circle, watches a star rise and directs another surveyor to mark the place on the wall where the star appeared. When the star sets, he causes another mark. By lowering a plumb bob from the marks on the wall, the places at the foot of the wall, inside and directly below the marks, are found. Right? Lines are drawn to the center of the circle. By bisecting the angle between these lines with chords and markings, true north is found. The surveyors probably made a number of tries to be sure of getting the correct direction. So, it's likely, he says, that they used that method, but who knows? That sounds like a crazy method. Ancient and modern, we skip quite a bit. Ancient and modern critics alike have berated the kings of Egypt for spending their kingdom's wealth and their subjects' labor on such useless monuments. Of course, the kings who built the pyramids did not regard them as useless, but as a sure means of gaining a pleasant and everlasting afterlife. As things turned out, the pyramids were not all wasted effort. In building them, here's the reason I include this paragraph, the Egyptian engineers learned much more about quarrying, shaping, and moving heavy stones. So it may have been a useless project. It may have cost a lot of labor and sat there in the desert for the next thousands of years doing nothing, but they learned an awful lot on that project. And that's why it is not the case that essentially unproductive work is not absolutely unproductive, because you can actually use your experience and knowledge from unproductive work to do more, potentially even more unproductive work in the future, like build bigger pyramids. But this knowledge became a part of the world's general fund of technological wisdom. When Third Dynasty kings first began to build structures in stone, they proceeded with a kind of nervous caution. To be on the safe side, they adhered to architectural forms as much as possible, like the earlier forms of brick, wood, and other material. Djoser's pyramid and the other buildings of its temple compound are full of such imitations. Stone walls are carved to look like reed matting. The roof is carved on the underside to resemble a roof of rounded logs. They carve stone to look like logs. Columns imitate supporting members gathered from the plant world. They mimic the palm trunks, the bundles of reeds and saplings, the papyrus stems, singly and in bunches, with which Egyptians had been holding up their flimsy dwellings. The ribbing of columns indicates bunches of slender stems lashed together. Foliage of the appropriate kind is carved on stone at the top of the columns. After all, such slavish imitation of plant forms might not make any difference in the strength of the column, but then again, why take chances? Stress analysis was undreamed of, and no architect wanted his temple to collapse because he had dared to break away from known shapes. That's I think, a modern reading. I think this guy's coming at that from a modern direction, saying they wouldn't want to innovate because they're afraid of innovation. But I don't think the Egyptians had the idea of innovation. I don't think that they were weighing the possibilities of using a different way or just using the old way. You just use the old way. There's never a question. And once in a while someone comes along and has something new, and everyone just knows that that person is insane. So I think that this author is giving them too much credit, the Egyptians. Now it shows a bunch of different pillars. Egyptian papyrus, Egyptian date palm, Persian animal, Greek Doric, Greek Ionic, Greek Corinthian, Roman Corinthian, Indian foliage, and Indian plain capital. By the time of King Khafra, architects no longer thought that a stone supporting member had to look like a tree trunk. Khafra had his so-called Valley Temple near the Sphinx built with plain square columns, as starkly functional as anything in modern architecture. Now, you didn't have to just go with a plain square column. You could do something, but why not a square column? Withal, the habit of carving imitation tree trunks in stone to hold up the roofs of public buildings persisted. The familiar three orders of classical Greek temple columns, Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian, probably evolved from Egyptian temple columns with their lotus, papyrus, and date palm capitals. Now, I just pause there to say that ancient Greece was fascinated by the Egyptians. They were utterly fascinated. They thought the Egyptians were the oldest, civilization. And I think Herodotus estimated the pyramids as being quite a bit older than they actually are, if I remember correctly. But anyways, they greatly admired Egypt, and so it would be normal for them to accept or try to import some of Egypt's cultural things. And that seems to be what happened with the three orders of columns. In other parts of the world, the capitals of columns were derived from other plant and animal forms. Just remember, next time you pass a bank with conventional Greek columns before it, that you are beholding an imitation in concrete, of an imitation in stone, of a simple wooden log. Very reminiscent from that bit out of the Fountainhead, copies in plaster of copies over you. We skip about a page and a half here. Of the later Egyptian temples, the most impressive is that of Ammon of Opet, usually called after the modern village of Karnak. Parts of it go back as far as 2000 BC. Some of the early buildings were demolished to make room for grander structures, whereas others were allowed to stand, while later buildings rose around them. In the course of the centuries, the temple acquired the form of a long rectangle about 400 by 1200 feet. However, the symmetry of this rectangle was spoiled by kings who haphazardly added more buildings and monuments until the vast temenos became a chaos of walls, columns, pylons, courts, temples, statues, obelisks, and shrines. The most impressive part of the Temple of Ammon is the Hypostyle Hall, built by Ramses II, about the 13th century BC. Ramses was one of the ablest, most aggressive, most self-conceited of all the kings, nearly 300 of them, who ruled the land of Kem before the Persians came. He had a mania for statues of himself, the bigger the better. After his time, Egypt was dotted with colossi displaying idealized versions of Ramses' lanky form and large, hooked nose, and a big bump in the middle. One colossus, dug up near Saqqara, S-A-Q-Q-A-R-A, now stands in front of the railroad station in Cairo. Remains of another, fallen and broken into three pieces at Ramses' mortuary temple in the City of the Dead across the Nile from Opet, inspired Shelley's Ozmindias. Now, this is such a good poem, I have to read it. If you don't know it, this is your first encounter with Shelley's Ozmindias. I met a traveler from an antique land who said, "Two vast trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them, on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read, which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed." And on the pedestal these words appear, quote, "My name is Ozmindias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair." Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away. Out in the middle of the desert, two legs and this inscription, "Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair." Interesting. The fact that the real Ramesseum and its fallen colossus do not answer at all well to Shelley's description does not detract from the beauty of the poem, which, across the gulfs of time and space,